What is your best or funniest Scott Hall story?
I don't have any funny Scott Hall stories, to be honest. I have a lot of great memories of Scott, and I have one that is the most profound to me, and I don't think Scott would mind if I shared this. And I don't want to end this on a down note, so hopefully you got something funny lined up for the finish here. But when I left WCW, and then I was brought back to WCW whenever it was, 2000, whatever, and I was working with a company called Fusion Media, and we were in the process of purchasing WCW from Turner Broadcasting. As a part of that process, once we kind of announced it, and we were really working towards, okay, what are we going to do once we announce it, I had to go meet with key pieces of talent that we were going to decide to keep on board. And I wanted to see where their heads were at. I went down to Orlando to meet with Kevin and Scott. Kevin was still live in Jacksonville at the time, but Scott was living in Orlando. Kevin came down to Orlando, I flew down to Orlando, and I spent a late afternoon. We went out to dinner, just shooting the breeze and getting a feel for each other. And I was trying to figure out where their heads were at. And Scott wasn't really drinking that much. He may have had a drink or two or a beer or two at dinner. And then we got in the car, and there was a 12-pack in the car. Kevin was driving. And Scott, by that time, Scott had gotten pretty lit up, and he directed Kevin to go over to a strip club. Not that. It was a strip club that Scott Hall used to work at before he ever got into wrestling. He was a bouncer in the strip club. And by the time we got there, because it was like a 45-minute drive, by the time we got there, Scott was pretty well lit up. And I was just along for the ride, trying to reconnect with my friends who were going to end up possibly working for me again. And Scott started telling the story about when he was a bouncer in this club. And he got very animated and very emotional. It was I had not experienced anything quite like that before. It became very, like he was reliving the experience. Kevin pulled up to the strip club. It was about 8 o'clock at night, so there was a little bit of traffic there, cars there. So Scott's walking me around, and Kevin was there too, walking me around the strip club, and we got to a certain point by the door, and then Scott recreated a scene where when he was the bouncer there, was trying to get somebody out of the bar, keep somebody from getting the bar. I don't remember the background of the story, but the guy pulled a gun on Scott. Scott wrestled the gun away from the guy, and the gun went off and killed him. And when Scott told me, it was impactful, and it kind of sunk in, because you look at somebody like a Scott Hall and the gifts that he had, his look, his just physical ability, his mind. People have, God. If you didn't know Scott Hall, you had no idea how talented he was. So to hear that story, yeah, that was tough. So we're gonna lighten it up.
We'll go later. So it's, you mentioned you were talking earlier about WCW and about people going back to rewatch stuff and like WCW Saturday Night and things like that. And somebody asked here, why do you think that WWE didn't take advantage of the WCW intellectual property like they maybe did with ECW? Because as an example, those shows you talked about, you can't find WCW Saturday Night on the network, or you can find a bit of it, but not a lot. Why do you think they didn't choose to use it more, make a WWE Nitro or a pay-per-view?
I don't know why you can't find WCW Saturday Night because there's some pretty crappy stuff on the network, but and there was a lot of great talent that was a part of WCW Saturday Night. Ric Flair and Arn Anderson and so many more, including Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin and others. But that show never, it was one step up from the old studio shows, you know what I mean, in terms of production value. That may have had something to do with it. But I think the reason that Vince never really wanted to showcase WCW is because it took a chunk out of his ass. It pushed him up against the wall. We almost, and I had heard this before, but when I actually went to work for WWE as a talent in 2002, I became pretty friendly with guys like Kevin Dunn and Bruce Pritchard and other people that had been around for a long time that were significant executives who flat out told me, once we got to be pretty good friends, I said, dude, you have no idea. They were literally taking the water coolers out of the office building because they couldn't afford to service the water coolers anymore. WWE almost went out of business because of WCW. And I think because of that, there was just, they were only willing to showcase WCW so much in the WWE portfolio, if that makes sense.
And do you think that's why, because obviously when you went to WWE in 2002, they finally got Goldberg the next year, and it was this 1 year deal where he looked like he didn't want to be there, it felt like they didn't want him to be there, and it seems this bizarre thing where you've got Goldberg, you've got this kind of cash cow ready to go, and they're just not going to make it work. It felt like it would just be the easiest thing in the world to make him a big star in WWE.
A lot of that had to do with Bill. And this is not a criticism of Bill, it's just a fact. Bill came into WCW with zero wrestling experience, very little wrestling knowledge, and very little wrestling interest, but it was a great opportunity, and Bill was done with his football career and really was looking for something else to do. He knew a lot of guys, he worked out with Sting and he worked out with Lex Luger at, Sting and Lex's Gym, so he had some contacts there. And I think, honestly believe that Bill was like, what the hell, I'll give this a shot and see if it works, if not, not. He got into WCW, we put him into the power plant, we fast-tracked him. Before he knew it, he's beating everybody. He was 187-0 or whatever it was, and now he's beating Hulk Hogan in the main event on a Nitro that drew 45,000 people in the arena and probably did 12 million viewers at home and 6 million homes. So he got thrust into the limelight with very little fundamental skills. We worked hard to protect Bill. The reason he went to 176-0 or whatever the number was is because he wasn't able to have a 4 or 5 or 6 minute match that went back and forth. He comes out strong, the heel takes advantage of him, starts to cheat, he has to sell, he goes down, he makes his big comeback. That's a basic match, right? Bill didn't have the experience to do that. He was just, I'm going to snort fire, I'm going to spear you, I'm going to jackhammer you, I'm going to pin you. That's all he could do. And then you fast forward him through WCW and to the point where he beats Hogan. Fast forward again, now he's in WWE where the demand on your ability to work is increased tenfold. The expectations by Vince and everybody else in WWE, once you step into that ring, your work rate and your ability to tell stories in the ring means everything. Bill got there and he didn't have that skill set. And it was apparent. And there was resentment, there was resistance, there was lack of chemistry as a result.